Welcome back to another episode of Self Careapist Therapist. My name is Lorraine Moorhead, and I'm the host. And today we're going to answer 5 common questions concerning EMDR. So whether you are new to EMDR or a seasoned and certified practitioner, my hope is that we'll have a question and answer that you can apply to your cases today, because I'm pulling all of these questions from EMDR consultations that I've done with therapists in the community. So if you love these deep dives, be sure to head to selfcareapist.com and subscribe to the newsletter, where each week's topic is different than the podcast topic. And go ahead and follow and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform, as this helps other curious clinicians find us. So the theory behind EMDR is that the brain has a natural and adaptive capacity to process information. For those of you familiar, this is called AIP, or Adaptive Information Processing. And the idea is that we have hundreds and thousands of thoughts and memories go kind of in one ear and out the other throughout the day. And normally, this is like a really protective and positive capacity that our brain has. However, the matrix kind of gets stuck when a trauma happens, either one time or a series of traumatic events over time, because that starts to get held up in the processing system. And of course, the reason that it does this is protective. The brain wants to alert us if we're walking back into a situation that could be potentially dangerous. And so it does what we call generalize, which means what might start as, I'll give this example, what might start as something happens while I'm traveling on an airplane and I start to get a little bit nervous and panicked. And then it starts to happen anytime I think about getting on an airplane, which kind of makes sense, right? It's like alerting me like, hey, that scary thing could happen again, just be aware. But then what it starts to do, maybe as I become alerted to the airplane situation, is it starts to alert me. Maybe what I've seen is it alerts me if I'm standing in line at the store. It alerts me if I'm waiting in a drive-through line. It alerts me if I'm outside of the house for too long. And anytime I start to leave, maybe it alerts me. And so what starts as a really helpful and protective mechanism, when it's saying, hey, Lorraine, you might start to get panicky, or like, hey, you're starting to feel a little panicky, better get out of this situation. It's now happening more often than not. And the situations that are triggering it are less and less connected, which means at a certain point, I might not even be sure what that feeling is linked to, because I really can't make the connection cognitively between the drive-through line and an airplane. But EMDR has a way of kind of tracking down those trends so that they can. So the idea is that the human brain also possesses the ability to process experience and emotion into a functional memory. And the way that it does that is by incorporating all of the positive and resourceful methods that the individual has had throughout their lifespan to help them cope with situations. And it pairs those stimuli so that you're better able to deal with those traumatic events, because they're reprocessed and the heat is taken out of them, so they are not generalizing to as many situations. And you're able to, in many cases, look upon that original situation that happened with less heat, with less anxiety, and for some people with more neutrality or understanding, or a variety of other less negative emotions over time. So one common question, because I talked about the resources, is how long will EMDR take? And of course, like any therapy, this really does depend. And oftentimes when people, our clients, and sometimes even us and our colleagues, when we're thinking about EMDR, we're thinking about those reprocessing stages. So because we're considering the eye movement to be an important part of EMDR, people are wondering when the eye movements are going to start. And we'll talk about that too. But what's important to consider is that EMDR is an 8-stage protocol, and we're already doing it in the first stage. So well before we get to the reprocessing portion, we're already doing it. And I think that's a really important consideration to let our clients know about. Specifically, one of our main goals when determining whether it's appropriate to start EMDR with a client is determining whether our client is able to have one foot in the present as well as one foot in the past when the initial traumatic event occurred. So the foot in the present is important because that's showing that they're grounded and they're able to look back to that previous time, visit it, maybe even walk through it, but they're not feeling like they're stuck there, like that's where they are now. They're not dissociating to the point where they're not having that present moment awareness. And I originally trained in EMDR in around 2009. And I think my instinct early on was that when people were interested in starting EMDR, I wanted to get them to that reprocessing and get them to that potential relief as soon as I possibly could. And so I found myself probably rushing through those first couple of stages and in an effort to get to the reprocessing. But what I realized over time and how I practice now is that if I can't determine whether a person is able to have their foot in the present, I want to really give them more and more resources to be able to do so. So when we're providing the calm place, when we're providing the container exercise, when we're doing some meditations, but also when we're asking them what they use when they're in a stressful situation that seems like it works well, I'm pulling from all of that. So whereas way back in the past, I might have been trying to just teach these things and get through them so I could move on more quickly. Now I might be spending multiple or even many sessions doing these because I think that this part is really important for people to have. I want a client to know that they can leave the material that we're working on in the session, and then transition back to their life and feel okay with it. You know, we can talk a little bit about the length of sessions too, because I think that is an important consideration also when trying to allow clients to really leave the work that we're doing in the session and not take it with them. But I want my clients, when we're moving into reprocessing, to be able to emotionally regulate, to be able to shift states like past and present and back again. And I want them to be able to tolerate big emotions and comfortably access negative emotions. So if this requires multiple sessions while we're doing other things to really just build this capacity, then I'm okay doing that. Something I might be looking for is if clients seem to go to the past and talk about in kind of a rapid fire way everything that they've been through, and they almost seem disturbed if I step in to engage or ask a question. They almost seem distracted when they're leaving the past to come back to the present moment to answer questions. That's one of the cues I look for to determine whether it feels really appropriate to move on from resourcing or whether it could be really beneficial to offer them more resourcing opportunities. So sometimes I will have that client or that conversation with a client in an ongoing way where I'll say, hey, I really want to provide more resourcing, because they'll be asking questions like, well, when are we going to get to the EMDR? And I want to let them know that we're doing it, and their ability to increase the capacity to handle some of these emotions is one way to gauge, how they're feeling and doing in everyday life, but whether it feels like an appropriate opportunity to move into a next phase. But also just kind of keeping that dialogue open. On that note, in terms of capacity, another question that I've had in EMDR consultations is how to do the timeline. So when a client comes in and shares maybe a current emotional response that they're having, and we start to explore other times that they've had that response, back in 2009, how we were trained to do it was take a timeline of all the events that might be relevant and jot them all down, make a timeline of it. I've even seen people in consultations prescribe their clients to do this as homework. And really, how things have shifted over the years of the different trainings that I've taken is now I really lean on having clients only identify most recent, first, and worst. And sometimes there's even overlap between a couple of those, because there's no reason for me to ask my clients to go revisit every bad thing that's ever happened to them. And I'm definitely not asking them to do it without me in the room to be able to help them to leave those in the past and keep one foot in the present moment. And it isn't about I don't have any doubt that my clients are strong and capable. I know that they can do it. And my clients are very intuitive and have spent a lot of time thinking through the situations that they've endured. So it's not that they can't, it's just that why would I want them to? If there is a less emotionally upsetting way to do it, which I believe first, worst, and most recent is, then why would I ask them to torture themselves? I use this example a lot, but I had a professor in my college human event class that used to say he wanted like a great overview at the beginning of our papers that told us where we were going and where we were coming from. And it was really gentle so that we're not dragging him through a forest, which is the rest of the paper, kicking and screaming. And I always think about that. Like, if we can just have a gentle overview that's supported and full of resources, why would I subject someone to being like tortured, kicking and screaming through going through their whole timeline? So it's not that I don't believe that they can. It's just that I don't know why anyone would want to. Another question I get often is how do I feel about virtual EMDR through telehealth? And how do I feel about eye movements compared to other BLS? So this might be a bit controversial, but I prefer eye movements. I think a lot of the initial research on EMDR has involved eye movements. And for myself also, that is where I can feel the most sensation from bilateral stimulation. The goal of bilateral stimulation is to help to link what's happening in the left side of the brain with the right brain, similar to what happens in REM sleep, where the left brain is the logic brain, the right brain holds a lot of creativity, speech is formulated on one side and thought is formulated on one side. And what we're trying to do is help to connect the two to be able to process bits of information. And for me, I think that when it's possible for a person, eye movements work really, really well. So with my clients, they know that I generally prompt them to try eye movements first. And then if they indicate that there is a strong preference or it doesn't feel comfortable or it's not feeling good to them, then we'll move to try different formats. But for me, I think whether it's virtual or in person, that eye movements work generally really, really well for people. I certainly have had clients over the years that can get a great deal of in processing done with different types of movements and have been very sensitive to like butterfly taps or buzzies. And I think that's great if that works best. It's just my general format to start with eye movements first. And I think virtual works very well for people just like in person does. So that takes precedence, like that preference is secondary to my preference for eye movement. So, in talking about how our brain generalizes across situations, one of the considerations of EMDR is that the situation pairs with a negative self-thought. We call this a negative cognition. And if you know an EMDR therapist or you are one, then they commonly refer to this as an NC, negative cognition. So I'll use the phrase interchangeably. And it helps to find the NC, the negative cognition, that pairs with that first traumatic event and the subsequent most recent and worst traumatic events, because that helps to show you whether those events are under the umbrella of the same negative cognition. So that being said, I earlier gave the example of a traumatic event involving an airplane, and now it has generalized to those feelings of being panicking in line, in the drive-through line. I would know if those are linked to the same target if they're under the umbrella of the same negative cognition. So sometimes you'll find situations and events that elicit the same response, but they are under a different umbrella of a different negative cognition. And only working through one of those targets will tell you whether it's taken away that second negative cognition or whether you still need to now reprocess the events under the umbrella of the next negative cognition. So negative cognitions can be challenging to find. And one reason for this is because often they're developed when the brain is young. So let me give you an example. If there was a child who was not receiving adequate love or care or provisions like food and shelter when they're little, as an adult, we look at that child and we say, oh, you deserve to have love and care and provisions, right? But in that childhood mind, when that child is looking at their situation, they might be thinking something like, well, if I was better, smarter, kinder, my parent would want to provide those things for me, you know? And so oftentimes we'll be dealing with the adult. We'll be dealing with a more sophisticated brain that will know, like, yeah, well, I deserve to have those things. But that negative thought was kind of programmed in as a child. So even though the adult brain knows on a logical level that they deserved to have certain things, they're still on instinct looking at situations and thinking they're not deserving. And so sometimes when we're talking with our clients about those NCs, we'll be trying to dialogue with the adult brain about that negative cognition. And we're really wanting to connect with that more instinctual negative cognition. So that's one of the challenges that we run into. I will say that certainly there are ways that we can start with the body sensations. We don't have to start with the negative cognition if we haven't zeroed in on the best one yet. But I do think it just the work is so fruitful when we do have that NC. So here are considerations to finding a good NC, because this is a topic that comes up so often in consultation. Number one, is it about the self? So unfortunately, with an NC, it has to be about not only the self, but your own self. I say this because oftentimes when clients come in to work with us in therapy, not just with EMDR, they want to process something that's going on with another person in their life, whether it's a mom, a partner, someone at work. They're really frustrated with the behavior of somebody else. And so when we're asking, like, what does it say about you? Or what does it say about yourself this situation, it's really easy for them to say, well, it's not really about me. It's about this poor behavior that's happening around me. And so just to find a good NC, it really has to be about the self. And often maybe the question is, well, what does it say about you that you're around this behavior that you want to talk about? There are some different prompts that you can use to get closer to the NC, but sometimes that'll be the first layer of resistance, is getting to a statement that is really about the individual's self. Another consideration for a good NC is it negative? If the NC is neutral or positive, then it doesn't really hold weight as an appropriate NC. Is it a belief? Because it can't be true. It has to be a belief for it to be an appropriate NC for this method. And I'll give you an example. I have a mentor who was providing services in a country that was under attack. So she was providing EMDR to individuals who had endured attacks, but were also at any given time possibly going to have more attacks in their communities, near their homes, and in their country. And so if somebody had an NC that was, I'm not safe right now, then is that a belief or is it true? You know, there might be an area that someone does believe that they are safe right now, but they believe that they're not. And that's a little bit different than living in a state that is currently compromised and it literally may not be safe at any given time. So that's an example about something being a belief versus being true and how to sort of distinguish between the two. I will say that oftentimes in EMDR consultation, I am able to look through people's workbooks that they get during their EMDR training, and there is often a list of negative cognitions that they're trained to use. And sometimes those negative cognitions aren't great NCs to use because they aren't a belief, aren't about the self, or aren't true. So this might be a great homework assignment to do right now. Go look at the NC list that you might be using with your clients or even offering to them when they're figuring out their NC and see if they meet the criteria that we're talking about right now. And then another consideration is it about the here and now? Because all of us might have had a negative thought that applied as a child that adaptive information processing through time has naturally allowed us to see is no longer true. And we're really talking about an NC that continues to feel true in the here and now once we set aside our logic brain. Like, do I, in my body, in my mind, do I feel that this is true in the here and now? Those are the criteria that make a good NC. Also, I had a consultee that really put this to a client well. She used to say, does that NC feel like a gut punch? And what she meant by that is we want that NC to have some teeth. Like when you think about it, we want it to feel like, ooh, that's the right one, because that is an uncomfortable thing for me to realize I think about myself or I feel about myself. And unless we have an NC that has that kind of a weight to it, we're really not going to be able to desensitize that cognition. I've tried EMDR as a consultant and as a client just to see what I felt fit the best. I've wanted to see a wide variety of EMDR progress through a lot of trainings, a lot of experiential and my own therapy. And I will say at times, if a therapist has suggested or told me what the NC was that we were going to work on, no movement can be made if it is not a weighty target and a weighty NC. So if it doesn't have teeth and it doesn't feel like a really emotional and relevant starting point, then you're not going to see the movement. So that's one consideration. If you're feeling like, man, my client isn't looking like they're experiencing any benefits, they're not looking like they're making any movement, go back and explore that target again and explore that NC and make sure that it's really a starting point that holds a lot of emotional weight for the client. Because if it's not that important target to them, or the NC is not, carrying a lot of emotional weight, then I wouldn't expect to see any movement. It'll be kind of a lateral shift. So that's something to explore if you're feeling like you're a little bit stuck. So if some other considerations, if someone seems like they're feeling stuck, is, first of all, you can change the BLS. So in my case, if I've started with eye movements and someone seems to be stuck or having the same emotional response with a given target after a certain period of time, and if I've already explored that target and that NC holds significance to them, then I could change the BLS. So this might be a time that you can offer them butterfly taps. You can offer them fuzzies. You can change it up that way. Also, you can change, this is usually where I go first, you can change the length and the speed of the BLS. So one of the first things that I do if I'm finding that someone hasn't made progress, or another thing that you might notice is that you've done the bilateral stimulation for so long that they've come out of it and felt more positive. And then because the BLS, the time went on further, you might find that they've dipped back in to that emotional cycle. So by the time you ask, what are you getting or what are you noticing? They're saying I'm still feeling really emotional, because you would have wanted to catch them right at the peak of their feeling good and coming out of it when asking. So we're kind of giving them enough time to come out of it and then dip right back into it. So by changing, or you might find that they're coming out of it and then you're not giving them quite enough time to process through it. And so by the time that you're asking, they're still in it. Whereas if you gave them a little more time, they could be coming out of it. So you can change the length of the BLS and you can speed it up. So oftentimes one of the first thing I'll do, first of all, I'm watching my clients really closely. I'm looking for any shift where if they're not tearful and then they become tearful, I give myself a cue to invite them back out of that session of the BLS the next time right before they're tearful. I'm watching their mouth to see an upturn or a downturn. I'm watching their eyes to see a flicker. And the first thing I might do is try to lengthen that BLS session if they're coming out of it and still feeling emotional. And I might check my length of time that way. But I also try to really speed it up if I notice that they're not quite out of it by the time I invite them back. I prompt them to go a little bit faster. You can also slow down and obviously make the sessions shorter. And sometimes it's just helpful to watch what their experiences are to be able to gauge what to try first. You can also combine BLS if it's feeling like you'd really like to invite them to have a different experience with them. You can give them eye movements and taps at the same time, or they can be doing eye movements at a different cadence than their buzzers are going. And this sometimes, especially if they are still thinking and their brain hasn't taken over with the BLS, um, it can be so confusing. You can't track like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You can't stay with your thought if you're focused on doing 2 different tempos for BLS. And that can be enough to get the person out of that thought that they've been really trying to track as well. So this is where I'll leave us for today because we just covered a lot of information. Um, I would say that even for someone who's done a lot of EMDR, it can be really helpful to meet with a consultant to just talk through some cases. There are a lot of great groups just where consultants get together and process their cases too. So I think it helps to have another set of eyes and another set of ears, no matter how many of these sessions you've done, because sometimes someone might catch something that you didn't catch. I think if you're still training and just learning EMDR, it can be really, really helpful to find a consultant that will view videos, because oftentimes what you're reporting in that occurred in the session is a little bit different than something that somebody else putting another set of eyes on it might pick up on. So as always, thank you for joining me. Let me know. You can track me down and send me an email at selfcareapist.com. Let me know what future EMDR questions that you have. And thank you for joining this episode. Please feel free to follow the show and subscribe to the newsletter for future EMDR updates.